What would you do if the jacket hanging in your hallway gave away your darkest secret? My husband found out the truth about my so-called girls' party, and instead of yelling or breaking things, he chose a colder kind of revenge. The papers he served me hurt far worse than any fight ever could. My name is Isolde Marin, and I am 32 years old. I work as an office assistant, and I always thought I was too smart to get caught in any trap. Yet somehow, I walked directly into one that I built myself, and now I'm sitting here telling this story like I am the victim, even though everyone else swears I am the villain, because apparently I broke the one rule people think cannot be forgiven, and I keep saying it was never what they believe it was. I met Nate Carter when I was 26 and he was already 31. He worked construction management, and people always said he was dependable and strong, though to me he seemed quiet and plain at first, but I told myself that stability mattered more than excitement, and I convinced my family he was the perfect choice. We built a life that looked perfect from the outside, with our 2 children, Emma, who is 7, and Caleb, who is 5, and a house that my parents bragged about whenever neighbors came over. And for years, I played the role of the good wife who kept things together while secretly telling myself I deserved more than routines and bills, and the tired smile Nate brought home every evening. Tom Hale had been my boyfriend before Nate. He was 33 now and worked in sales, and when he drifted back into my orbit, I felt something light up in me again. Not that I planned to do anything reckless, but I liked being reminded that men once fought for my attention and that I was still desirable beyond the title of wife and mother. My sister Clara Jennings is 29, and she tried warning me that I was stirring trouble by letting Tom come around, even casually, but I brushed her off and said Nate was just insecure, which always made me feel better, because painting him as controlling gave me permission to do whatever I wanted while convincing myself I was justified. My mother-in-law, Elaine Carter, is 61, and from the very start, she never liked how outspoken I was. And once Tom's jacket showed up in our hallway, she stopped hiding her suspicion. But I still thought I could twist the narrative and make everyone believe I was innocent while Nate was the one who should be questioned. That first slip happened inside our own home after what I kept calling a girls' party, though Nate never believed the story entirely, and I brushed off his questions by saying he was too serious. I remember walking in late with laughter still in my ears and tossing my coat on the rack, where it landed beside another jacket that was not mine. And when Nate saw it the next morning, he asked whose it was while I rolled my eyes and said maybe one of Clara's friends had forgotten it. Inside, I panicked because I knew exactly whose jacket it was. Tom had dropped by at the end of the night, and I told myself it was harmless. Nate did not argue further, but I could feel the silence pressing on me, and I hated how his quiet made me feel more exposed than yelling ever could. Still, I told Clara later that Nate was paranoid and insecure, which made me feel like I had already won. A week later, Nate showed up outside my office just as Tom was leaving, and I could see the suspicion burning in his eyes, though he said nothing at first. When we got home, he asked why Tom was there, and I snapped back that it was only coincidence, accusing him of stalking me instead of working like a normal husband. That night I told Clara he was suffocating me with his distrust, and she looked uneasy, but stayed quiet because I pressed her into silence. At work, I kept letting Tom linger, enjoying how he made me feel noticed, while at home I mocked Nate, in front of friends saying he acted jealous over nothing. The more I pushed that story, the more people laughed with me, and the more Nate sank into himself, like a shadow I refused to acknowledge. I thought I was in control, but deep down I knew something had shifted. At a family dinner, I turned Nate into the punchline because I needed everyone to see me as the witty one and him as the dull obstacle holding me back. I joked about how he never noticed when I bought new clothes and hinted he lacked ambition compared to other men we knew, and friends laughed while he just sat there with that stiff smile. Later, I told Clara he was too sensitive and should learn to laugh at himself, but her silence told me she no longer found it funny. Elaine stood up midway through the meal and left the table muttering that she would not watch her son be humiliated again. Even the children looked confused, as if they sensed the coldness underneath my words, though I kept insisting nothing was wrong. What I missed was how Nate's hand lingered on my phone left beside my plate, screen still lit with Tom's name. When I told Nate I was heading to another girls' night, he only nodded, and I took that as proof he had finally given up his petty doubts. In reality, I slipped away to meet Tomat, a downtown restaurant where I let myself laugh too loud and touch his arm too long, because I craved the attention I said Nate never gave me. Clara later admitted she saw Tom dropping me off near home, and though she hesitated, I quickly pressured her to keep quiet by saying Nate would only twist it into something ugly. When I walked inside, Nate was calmly folding papers into a leather briefcase, and he did not look at me when I asked what he was doing. I convinced myself he was sulking again, unaware that his silence meant he already had everything he needed. I thought cornering Nate would force him to finally explode, so I started accusing him of neglecting me, expecting him to argue or beg. Instead, he opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs of me with Tom, copies of messages, even a store receipt matching the jacket I had pretended not to recognize. My stomach dropped, but I forced tears and said it was only emotional, not what he imagined, and begged him not to destroy our family over a misunderstanding. He did not shout or curse. He only said everything was already with his lawyer. When Elaine heard, she looked at me with open disgust and told me she had warned me, while Clara avoided my eyes as if she no longer wanted to defend me. The next evening, Nate served me formal separation papers in front of everyone. I tried everything to twist the story so people would pity me, telling my parents and friends that Nate was cold and cruel for abandoning his own children. But every time I spoke, he countered with calm facts and documents that spelled out custody, arrangements, financial protections, and visitation schedules in language that made me sound like the reckless one. He never raised his voice, never lost control, just explained that Emma and Caleb deserved stability and that he would make sure they had it, while I scrambled for excuses that no one seemed willing to accept anymore. Elaine praised him openly in front of the children, calling him strong for choosing the proper path instead of chaos, and I hated her more than ever for celebrating my downfall so loudly. Clara, who once defended me out of sisterly loyalty, barely looked at me now, her eyes downcast whenever I tried to drag her into another justification. My friends, the same ones who had laughed with me when I mocked Nate in public, began keeping their distance, as if afraid of catching my shame by association. I told myself over and over that they were cowards, that they should have stood by me. Yet part of me knew they saw clearly what I had done, and no amount of gaslighting would make them forget it. The children packed their small bags without questions, and Nate loaded them into his car with the same steady hands he used for everything else, not even glancing at me as he buckled them in. I stood frozen in the doorway, clutching the frame so hard my knuckles ached, my eyes fixed on the empty coat rack, where Tom's jacket had once betrayed me more loudly than any confession ever could, and for the first time, I realized I had nothing left to spin. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.